Welcome to the Dental Decoders podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Rogars, and I'm here to help you crack the code on all things dental operations. Each week, we dive into topics to help you overcome roadblocks, streamline operations, and reduce team burnout. Whether you're an owner, a practice manager, or a team member, this podcast is for you. Join us for insightful discussions, engaging interviews, and practical tips. So sit back and relax as we crack the code on all things dental operations together. Thank you for joining us for the Dental Decoders podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Rogars, and our goal here at Dental Decoders podcast is to crack the code on all things operations in your dental practice. This week, I'm so excited to be joined by our guest, Dawn Taylor. Dawn is someone that I reached out to because I was having a lot of people reach out to me about how to improve their relationships, whether it be with their team members or, in dentistry, it's very common to work with your spouse. So sometimes it's even with your spouse. Also, we were asked a lot about mental health and coping with that, with the industry being the way that it is and having so many mental health struggles. I wanted to make sure that I found a guest that could come in and kind of fill that void for you guys. So I'm very excited to be able to interview and introduce you to Dawn Taylor. Dawn is the ass kicker hope giver and the host of a successful podcast, Taylor Way Talks, that digs into those topics that no one else is really willing to talk about. She's the owner of Taylor Way, a trauma specialist and an author. Dawn offers her clients a safe place to land as she passionately helps them find their worth, learn to live and love themselves through healing the trauma in their lives that is not only holding them back, but also how it's affecting their businesses and health. When working with Dawn, you'll develop efficient strategies to get the results you're looking for in all areas of your life, personal and professional. No matter if you're working with her one-on-one or in a group setting, she's here to guide you. We'll talk a little bit more about how you can work with Dawn and maybe some tips that you can use in your daily life to help you kind of cope and develop some strategies that you can implement in your life. I'm really excited to be talking to Dawn today. I already know there's going to be so many practical tips that you can take away to use in your practice. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this episode so your dental bestie can take away the same tips from this episode. And thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of Dental Decoders podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and be able to share your wealth of knowledge with our audience.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm very excited to be here.
So we have a signature question that we always end our episodes on. I've been kind of playing with this idea of asking it first because I think it's a really cool way to segue into conversation. So I'm going to give it a try with you if you don't mind being a guinea pig today.
All in. Let's do this.
Cool. So in your career or in your life, what has been your decoding moment or your secret code that's allowed you to be successful in your field?
Probably the biggest is stop listening to what anyone and everyone around me has said. So to really stay in my own lane. And what I mean by that is to really, truly understand who my ideal client is, why I do what I do, what my heart and my passion is behind that. But more than anything, then releasing all of my attachment of who I am and what my business is. And really learning to stay in my own lane. And I think that that's a pressure point that was there for way too long for me. And I see in a lot of my business owner clients is we become our business. So if something ever happens to our business, it goes after our self-worth. And so we get scared to make chances. We get scared to take a risk. We get scared to shut something down when we need to because our ego gets involved and then our worth is involved. And all of a sudden it's like, no, who am I without this? And that has been probably my biggest game changer in my business is really, truly figuring that out and not caring what anyone else is doing or what they tell me that I should be doing or watching them for what's working for them because their clients aren't my clients.
That is incredibly powerful and it resonates with me a lot. I feel like for me personally, I am this entrepreneur. This is my business. This is what I do. And I tie that so much into me as a person. And I feel like until this moment, I thought that was a strength. And not that it's necessarily a weakness, but it is just a different lens to look at it. Like if this all went away tomorrow, how would I feel about me? So That's one that I'm going to resonate on for a little while here. That was
But think
powerful.
but think about it for a second, right? Like we all do it. We don't ask someone like, "Hey, who are you?" and get anything other than like, "I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a." No, no, no. What are you? Like if all of this went away, who is left? And I think it's a reason why so many business owners fail, but it's also a reason for a lot of like our sleepless nights and our depression, our
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, and all of these things is we are judging ourselves so harshly because we think everyone else is judging us so harshly. I have this conversation daily with even entrepreneur friends where they're like, well, what if all of a sudden the economy and what if this and what if that and what if that? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll go get a job. And they're like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm still me. Like, I can go get a job. Like, a job is not actually a devil word, right? But we have convinced ourselves of it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, for anyone listening who is an entrepreneur or who has tied their full identity to what their career is, I would really, yeah, challenge you to really sit back and look at that and go, hey, wait a sec. What am I outside of that?
Just absorb that for a second, because that is just, yeah, a total mindset shift for me. I feel like when I am asked, like, yeah, tell me about yourself, I'm like, okay, well, I'm a mom and I have a business and I'm a wife, and it's all my like affiliation with other people and very little about actually me. So
Yep,
now I've
all
got some self
external.
reflecting to do. Welcome
So
to
welcome to
Brittany's
me.
therapy session. One of the pieces that you mentioned a couple of times in there that I want to kind of pull out and talk about a little bit more is external factors, what other people are thinking, or I'm afraid to do the thing because how other people may perceive this situation, or what are people going to think if I have to fail and get a job. How would you advise people, or what advice would you give someone who has got this like crippling fear of moving forward because of all that outside pressure?
So, a couple of things, even just the wording, if I fail and have to get a job, I want to challenge people on that because at what point did shifting mean we failed?
Mm,
It's not that we failed. Sometimes we don't have the capacity. Sometimes we actually are not in a life situation anymore where we can handle being an entrepreneur because we don't have the mental, emotional, physical, financial capacity anymore to do it. And we need a break, or we need more structure, or we need to not have to think about how we're going to find more income every day. And we need to just show up and get a damn paycheck. And I think that that's giving ourselves so much grace and removing the judgment from it right away to be like, no, it's just shifting what I need in my life right now to make me feel safe. And that is actually really beautiful to do. And I've had so many people in my world do that over the last 5, 10 years of like, you know what, I really just need a part-time job for a bit because business is feeling slow, and the panic behind it, right,
mhm.
becomes this like desperation, becomes this urgency. Now you're the desperate guy at the bar who stinks and everybody avoids, and so now you aren't getting business. Like that all ties in together. So when we
Yeah.
can really look at that and be like, no, this is actually just what I need right now to function, how awesome, I'm willing to give it to myself. When it comes,
Wow.
so then when it comes to the risk piece of it, first thing I always look at is what is my intention behind the change, right? What is my intention behind it? Is it to, make somebody else look bad? Is it to just make an obscene amount of money? Is it like, what is your intention behind it? If it's because it's something that's genuinely going to serve my clients, who cares what anyone else says other than my clients, because they're the
Mhm,
ones benefiting from it. Right? So that's one of the
mhm.
first things I look at. The second thing I look at when I'm about to make a massive change is it going to mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, relationally, or financially harm me or anybody else? Is it something that's going to cause a harm? So I've been with my husband for 28 years. We are in May, we have our 24th wedding anniversary. And so when I make a decision in my business, I will look at that and go, okay, I want to take a big risk. I want to take a big leap. I want to do this crazy thing. I have a conversation with him about it. I'm not asking for permission. Hear me when I say that. I'm not asking for permission. What I'm doing is going, hey, I need somebody outside, someone external in this situation to give me their feedback on what they think needs to happen. And so I always look at that little piece of it. And then the last thing I always do, and these are literally like the steps I go through on every decision. The last thing that I always look at is, okay, so what if this doesn't work and what if this sucks and I don't succeed with this? Cool. What is the absolute worst case scenario?
Mm-hmm.
And your brain might go to like, oh, I'm going to lose everything and end up homeless on this street, because our brain does. Like, our brain just naturally goes to this like horrifically worst case scenario. But have you ever mapped out how hard it would be to end there? If you don't have addiction issues, if you don't have some of those things, think about this for a sec as a business owner. You not only would have to just shut it all down, like walk away. You'd have to piss off all your clients to the point where they wouldn't come and find you and ask you to support them.
Mm-hmm.
You would then have to become lazy. And if you're an entrepreneur that owns a business, you're probably not that lazy, right? Because at some point you had to hustle hard to get this going.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to somehow learn to like shut off your entire drive and motivation and willpower. Like, and I don't know how to do this for someone, but you'd have to actually figure out how to shut all of that off. Go home, sit on your couch and do absolutely nothing. But here's the problem. All of that's going to take you a solid 6 months. At that point, if the weather is cold enough where I live, they can't kick you out of your house. The bank is not going to foreclose on your house in the dead of winter.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have like another 6 months to figure this out. And then in that time, you're going to have a full-time job pissing off anyone and everyone who's ever known you, loved you, supported you, birthed you, been a friend. So like, you're going to have to make them angry enough that they would rather see you live on a street than be in their lives. Think about that for a second.
Crazy. Yeah.
And I mean, yes, there's addiction issues and there's other things that play into this. I'm not saying this as a smackdown against anyone. Hear me when I say that. But think about that. And is that not often our biggest fear when we go to make a big change? I'm going to lose everything. I'm like, cool, let's map that out. What would it actually take to lose everything? I was talking to a client about this last week and I said, okay, so you're going to lose everything. What does that look like for you? He's like, well, what corner am I going to live on and what box? And I said, so for starters, you have a house worth $4 million you could sell. Oh. And I was like, with enough equity in it that you could not only sell it, pay off all of your debt to recoup the losses of this risk you're wanting to take, but then also pay cash for another house? And he was like, oh. I was like, you have RSPs and stocks. And like, what makes you think that this is the decision that's going to break all of it down? And so it's really facing it. And often people go, yeah, but I go to the worst case scenario. And I'm like, no, go there and hang out there for a bit. Really allow yourself to process what your game plan is going to be if you get there. And all of a sudden it feels less scary because you're like, wait a second, it would take a lot for that to actually happen.
Yeah.
But also know your end point. And here's what I mean by that. So I've taken on some projects over the years. I have done some insane things over the years. And every time I'm like, okay, so what is my number? What is my metric of when I know this isn't working? What is that point? Because that is the point you need to know. You need to have a metric of when you've hit success or you've decided that's the determined success level. And you need to have your metric of when you need to walk away. Otherwise, you're going to flounder. And we do.
That. Yeah.
Otherwise, we flounder, right? Because we don't ever feel like we reach success. And we also don't know when we need to like cut ties and walk away because now it's costing us too much. Now it's not working. Now we need to stop, rein it all back in, figure out what we need to shift, maybe what we need to pivot, and then try again. Right? But it's all ego. Let's be really blunt about that. It's all ego. We don't want to admit that it didn't work. Instead of going, no, that's okay. It's okay that that didn't work. Is it something I could move or shift or change or do different to attract my client? Hey, maybe I tried it and I didn't like it. Right? Yep. Like I've done that.
Me too.
Where I was like, ew, I don't actually want to do this. So let's just cancel this. Right? Had it cost me money? Yes. Had it cost me time to build it out? Yes. Like all of those things. But what's that point? What is that point you're going to give yourself permission to walk?
I want to piggyback on that a little bit because one thing that I'm seeing a lot on the Dental Nerd Facebook groups is people are going through dental school, which is now more expensive than I can even begin to wrap my head around. We're talking $500,000 for you to get trained. And then they start this career with these hopes of it being this fantastic, wonderful thing. And they're getting hit with reality, which is that maybe this isn't a good fit for me, or maybe they're just struggling with imposter syndrome, and they're comparing themselves to all of the people that they're seeing in these Facebook groups being super successful right out of school, and they're just not finding that alignment in their own life. So kind of rambling, but asking a two-part question. Part one is, if someone is listening and they are in that situation where they just got out of school, they have this huge investment in their success, and they're looking around going, I don't know if this is for me, or I'm not as good as this other dentist down the road. What would you say to that person?
So a couple things. This isn't for me. We are in a quitter society right now. And nobody likes to bump up against anything hard or uncomfortable or any of that. And so my number one word of advice would be like, just start the damn car. And what I mean by that is you can't steer a parked car. And so if you're just sitting in your car in a parking lot as a metaphor and you're like, but I'm not getting anywhere. Well, no, because your car's turned off and you're in park. Right? Often we have to just jump in. We have to just start doing something. And it doesn't mean that that's going to be the thing that you do forever. It doesn't mean that you're even going to do it for 6 months. But once you start moving, once you start doing, that is where all of a sudden you get some motivation, you get some momentum moving, you get some things happening, right? Where it's like, oh, here we go. Yeah, okay. I'm getting a paycheck, right? Things are starting to move. And that's where you then can start to shift and pivot. And I know everyone hates those words right now, but they're good ones, right? That's where you can then start to be like, oh, okay, am I loving this direction I'm going right now? No, I'm realizing that, hey, I'm out of school. I just started this. And I thought I was going to love one thing. And I realized that like my favorite thing ever is working with like little kids. I love doing dental work on little kids. So why am I in a seniors neighborhood with all seniors, right? We can't find our passion. We can't find our niche. We can't find what we thrive in and what's really going to resonate with us if we're not actually doing the work. And so this idea that you have to have a niche market right out the gate and you have to be like super successful right off the bat, I'm going to just call bullshit on all the people on the Facebook group or wherever that are like, I'm doing amazing. Nobody is thriving in their first year. Okay. We're just going to put that out there right now, because it's like a baby deer that just got birthed on new legs and you're having to figure out how to walk, right? Like it's going from book knowledge and everything that you learned in school to actually like hands-on doing it. Of course, you're going to feel like an imposter because you're learning a whole new thing. It's like learning a language on Duolingo is one thing. When you actually go to the country and now you have to speak it, you're like, wait a sec, I did 900 days. Why am I not fluent? Because there's all the other parts and pieces of it that they can't teach you in a book and they can't teach you in school. So it's allowing yourself to just be like, hey, wait, you know what? No, I'm not as good as that person because they have 10 years of experience. So what could I learn from them? That doesn't mean you're an imposter. It doesn't mean that you suck at what you're doing. It just means you're a beginner. And if you put me up next to you, you'd be like, I'm a rock star. World's greatest dentist. Yes. Right? Because I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. Know that every single person on this planet has imposter syndrome at all times. Everybody does. We all have those moments that we're like, ooh, do I actually know what I'm doing? Can I actually do this? But look back at your book of proof. And what that is we all have this like imaginary book in our head of every single time we've sucked. Every time we have failed, every time we haven't done a good enough job, every time we've disappointed ourselves. Oh, we could read it like a script to people. What we don't have is a book of proof. Every single time we succeeded, every single time we did a good job, every single time we shocked ourselves, every single time we crushed it. And look back at that. Look back at that book of proof to be like, no. I know how to do this. Because guess what? I have proof. I've done this before. And the line I always use for my brain is, to date, I've actually succeeded and gotten through every single hard thing I ever had show up. I have overcome every single hard day I didn't think I'd make it. So I'm like at 100% success rate so far. What makes this problem, this day, this client, this struggle bigger than all the rest that would break that average?
I needed to hear that today specifically. I'm having a Monday, and I needed to hear that today. So I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to set the tone for the rest of my day. So I'm glad that you shared that, and I'm going to write down my proof moments and keep those like physically here for me to look at, and that's something I'm really excited about. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Seriously, if you have to, type them up and literally put them above your computer on your office
Mm-hmm.
wall so that the minute that doubt starts to come in, you're like, no, 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 wait a sec. Also, as a dentist, like you didn't pay $500,000 and go to that level of schooling to have someone just be like, sure, you're good. You can
Yeah.
help people. No, no, no. I'm pretty sure there was like an odd test, exam, something, somewhere, someone had to actually say, this person is outstanding at what they do, and we trust them to do this job.
I think part of it at the beginning, you were talking about maybe you like to work with kids. And a lot of these people that I'm seeing in the groups are coming in and they're going into bread and butter dentistry. They're just placing fillings, they're filling machines. That
Yeah.
doesn't sound like, I'm not a dentist, but that doesn't sound like fun to me at all. That doesn't sound like
No.
something that, and not to knock anybody who loves placing fillings all day long, because somebody's got to love everything. Maybe that's your niche, that's your sweet spot. But that's another thing to consider too when you're in that spot of like, I don't know if I just make the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe you just haven't found that sweet spot yet. You haven't found what brings you joy inside the industry, because there are so many different fields inside this one
So many.
industry that you don't have to put yourself inside this box of, well, I place fillings and I do bread and butter dentistry. Maybe you like pros, maybe you like oral surgery. Explore those different fields along the way to bring you a little bit more joy every day while you're struggling through this feeling.
Totally. And it's so true. Like every time I talk to anyone in any type of business, where they started is never where they end up.
Exactly.
Nobody, I have not met a person yet that was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to start a business and it's going to do this exact precise thing. Never.
Mm-hmm.
They start and then they go 45 degrees and then another 70 degrees. And then they backtrack a little bit and then they go down another
Yeah.
pathway. And it's literally like being a child of the 90s with MapQuest printed directions on how to get
Yes.
somewhere and you took the wrong turn because you were too busy reading your sheets. And do you know what I mean? Like that
Yes.
is really just life. And when we can release that expectation that it's going to be anything but that, and that the fun is actually in the journey, that
Mm-hmm.
that's actually the sweet spot is the figuring out, that's where it gets fun, right? Because you start to figure out who you are and what you like. And you're like, oh, that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you know what? That really made me happy. Hey, you know what? I love bread and butter because it's paying my bills and then some. But there is some charity somewhere where I get to fly out and go to some place and do dentistry for an organization, or I'm going to fly up into like the Yukon and get paid an obscene amount of money to go for a month every quarter and do crazy dentistry on people. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows? Who knows what your thing is? Doesn't matter. That's the thing though. It doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't matter. It comes back to the stay in your lane.
Yes.
Who cares what everybody else is doing? They're not on your journey and they're not playing your game with your cards.
So powerful. I feel like we just did this fantastic job of bringing everything full circle, but I do have another question that I want to ask you.
Yeah,
So we're just going to keep going if you don't mind.
not at all.
I feel like it would be a wasted opportunity to have you on this show and not talk a little bit more specifically on some of the mental health issues that we're seeing in the industry right now. We touched briefly on the cost of going to school and then winding up in this industry and kind of face planning a little and just wondering what's going on. We're also seeing it with dentists who've been in the industry for a long time. One, your patients come in every day and they say, "Ugh, I hate going to the dentist. I don't want to see you." Then you get that kick in the teeth, and then you also get, you're dealing with these and I know you're Canadian, so you may not resonate with this next part, but we have dental insurance write-offs that are telling us we can only charge $5 for our services, even though it costs us 10 to do the services. So we're losing money, and we're having a hard time finding staff because there's a mass exodus from this industry. So it's leaving all of the industry professionals, or a lot of the industry professionals, feeling deflated, and they're really struggling with their mental health in general, bringing a positive attitude. How do we grow from this when I'm living in this moment of feeling defeated and overwhelmed and like everything is stacked against me? What is a practical tip or a couple of practical tips that you would give to someone who is feeling that burden, and how can they cope with that, or what tools can they put into place to overcome or live alongside this feeling in a way that is at least positive?
Okay, so right off the bat, if you're at a place of burnout, what a lot of people don't understand is when you burn out, it actually is destroying parts of your body, right? So your adrenals, your cortisol, your hypothalamus, like all of these things are actually being damaged. So we have this idea, and it's this, can I say bullshit?
Yes, absolutely.
It's this bullshit. I love that I asked as I said.
Right?
It's this bullshit self-help toxic positivity world right now that is like, you just need more self-care. And then that equals having like a bottle of wine and sitting and watching Netflix all night. No, you need more self-care, and like you need to go for IV therapy and replenish your vitamins, your minerals, your nutrients in your body. So when burnout is happening, when the depletion is happening, that is the first thing I recommend to people. Go get an IV. They're not crazy expensive. It's the replenishment from it is downright magical at times in my world. And myself and a lot of people, like my doctor always jokes that I built his entire IV clinic by pushing my friends and my family and my clients into going. Because I'm like, no, we're going to be healthy and we're going to function. Right? So acknowledge where you're at. Actually sit and acknowledge where you're at. Scale of 1 to 10, where are you at financially? Scale of 1 to 10, where are you at emotionally? Where are you at in your relationships? Where are you at with your staff? All of those things, right? Because if you don't know the true picture of where you're at, how do you fix it? You can't, right? So now you're just like putting a little bit more icing on it and hoping it's going to be okay. So sit and actually sit with it. Right? Rumble in it a minute, sit with it and be like, where is everything actually at? Then ask yourself 3 questions. What's working? What's not working? And how do I fix it? Because all of them are fixable. It's not why is it happening, because that's a victim statement. And yes, it's a strong wording on it, but it's a victim statement because it's making it all about us, and it's only an emotional response. So the only way you can respond to a why question is with a justification, a rationalization, or an excuse. There's no data. There's no intellect. So if you're like, why is it this way? Why? No. You're not going to get an answer out of yourself that is going to help. Right? So go back to what's working, what's not working, and then how do I fix those? So let's use the staffing issue as an example. As much as there are staffing issues, 95% or some crazy statistic I heard the other day of people don't leave the job, they leave their boss. Ouch. But girl, you and I have both been there. Right? People aren't doing a mass exodus because they hate the industry. They're doing a mass exodus because of the environment that they're working in. So when anyone listening to this right now is like, roar.
Yep.
I don't want to look in a mirror. I don't want to have to accept this. But this is a no judgment, just curiosity zone. This isn't about judging yourself or that you failed or you suck or you're a horrible boss, anything. It's going, hey, wait a sec. I'm not going to judge. I just actually want to get really, really curious on this. What would make this an environment where people would be fighting to work here? I'm a very intense boss. And what I mean by that is my brain vibrates at almost 3 times the pace of an average person's brain. I've actually gone for testing. So I go 100 miles a minute, 15, 16 hours a day. I crash and sleep and then I get up and go again. There is an intensity about me that's a lot of people can't handle. But here's the thing. I would hire staff that couldn't handle it, and then they'd quit or they'd be angry or they'd be mad and they'd leave. And it was one of my last staff members that I had about 4 or 5 years ago that I was like, what would I have to change to make you enjoy working here? Not why are you leaving? I was like, what would I have to change? And she started listing off all of these things. And I was like, cool, not going to happen. And she was like, what? And I was like, I'd literally have to turn my entire business around. Like, I would have to stop my 911s for clients. I'd have to stop going over on sessions if they needed. I'd have to stop taking calls between clients. And like, no, that actually shifts my entire business model. So that's not the right fit. So what I shifted about it was, this is the culture that is going to be in my company. Who will love the culture? How do I find the right fit for that? Because I can train people in how to do the job. You can't train people on how to live in a culture.
Yes.
And that shifted it entirely. I've now had I've had 3 team members long-term that all love their jobs. Like, love their jobs. I'm talking this last year, I asked my staff what they wanted for a bonus for the year and what would make them feel loved, seen, heard, appreciated, everything. And I was like, you could have cash, you could have a gift card for somewhere, you could have a trip. Like, I don't care. I don't care. What do you want? 2 out of 3 asked for my time.
Wow.
I just want to hang out with you. Can we go on like a trip together? And guess what? I haven't had to shift my intensity because they love it about me. And they know how to manage it. Right? So when I looked at it, it was like, okay, what's working? What's not working? And how do I fix it? And that became part of it. Right? So in the like, ugh, everyone hates coming to the dentist feel, I owned a restaurant a million years ago, and every time people would come in and be super grumpy, we'd break out into like a Thriller dance on the line. Well, it was like, it wasn't a subway, but it was like that kind of line that you went through. And every time they'd be like, ugh, I've had the worst day, we'd all break into a Thriller dance for like 10 seconds, and then we'd keep going, and nobody could figure out why we had broken into the dance. But customers started to watch for it and try to figure it out. And it took like 6 months before one of our regulars was like, is it every time someone complains you guys dance? And I just smiled and I was like, I don't know. You know what it did? It took 10 seconds of time. It had all of the staff completely shift their state. So they all went from like, ugh, to laughing. It shifted the state of everybody in the lineup. And it became our thing. It became like this hilarious thing that nobody could figure out. It was like this puzzle everybody wanted to solve. Get out of your box. Start thinking outside of the box. We are not living in an era or a time where we have critical thinkers. We're not living in a time where people know how to find the positive. Like, we are not in this time where people are even understanding their mental health. So that means we as leaders, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we have to get out of our damn box and start thinking about it different. So go back to where it was when you first started. I do an annual check-in on myself where I go back to like when I first started this company 9 years ago. Well, it's funny, 9 years, 3 days ago.
Congrats.
But, thank you. Right? But it's like, where was I? What was my passion? What were my core values of my company? Why did I do this? What was the problem I was wanting to solve? And I remind myself of that on a regular basis, because even on the really, really, really hard days, it always goes back to that. Am I still doing those things? So create an environment where people want to come into your office, where they don't hate going to the dentist anymore. Take care of your physical health so that you're not in constant burnout mode. Take care of your mental health. Stop having toxic positivity, having to have these moments of gratitude all the time. Maybe you need to rage at the end of your day. Maybe you need to get into your car and punch your steering wheel and you just scream at the top of your lungs and then listen to like, I always listen to Sounds of Silence by Disturbed. Because it's like the best song ever for like matching your intense energy of a hard day. Maybe that's what you need to do, and you need to release it, because at the end of that, you're like, oh, okay, now I can breathe. And even with the insurance thing, what are other add-ons that you can do? What are the other add-ons that you can do to make up your money somewhere else? Also, if you're giving the right service and you're providing in the right way, people will pay. They'll pay the extra $5. because they love you so much and they want to support your business.
Absolutely.
But people can't feel like a number. They can't feel like a number and they can't feel like a peon.
This has been a powerful, I've probably said 100 times this episode, so I'm sorry for anyone listening. You guys can like take an espresso shot every time I say the word powerful, but it's fine. But this has been such a powerful episode. I feel like there are so many maybe not easy to implement, but easy to identify and then implement takeaways and action items in this episode that is going to make a huge impact for our listeners or anyone listening. You don't have to be a dentist. You don't have to work in the dental field. There's so many key tips in this one that I think are just incredible. So thank you so much for taking time to chat with me and to share your wealth of knowledge with our audience. I would love for my listeners to be able to find you and connect with you more and support you. Can you tell us where we could go about finding you and how we can connect with you?
Absolutely. So I am my business card calls me the ass kicker hope giver, which I'm sure you got a bit of that in this podcast because I'm very no fluff. Like, let's just get you results.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a trauma specialist by trade. That is what my career is. And you can find me at the Taylor Way now, or at thetaylorway.ca is my website. The Taylor Way now on Instagram, Dawn Taylor on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place.
Awesome.
And I also have my own podcast called The Taylor Way Talks,
which I cannot wait to check out. We touched on it a little bit off camera, but I'm super excited to be able to check that out because I don't want to spoil it, but go listen to her podcast as soon as you finish this episode.
It's all hard conversations, but done in a cool way.
A cool way that seems just so hard to believe with the conversation that we've had today, Dawn. Thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate you taking the time out.
Oh, you're so welcome. And just one last thing for everyone listening. Yeah. You are worth fighting for. Don't give up. Don't give up. Just sometimes the outcome might not look like what you wanted it to, but often that's exactly where you're meant to be. So keep fighting the good fight.
On that note, thank you for joining us, Dental Decoders, and I can't wait to touch with you next week. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Dental Decoders podcast. We hope you took away a valuable piece of information. As always, don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe to help us build our community of dental decoders. We look forward to seeing you for next week's episode.